They said his skin was forged in hellfire, burning anyone foolish enough to touch him. King Garrick was a monster isolated by a lethal curse, ruling his kingdom from the shadows. That was until a peasant girl walked directly into his blood-soaked den and did the unthinkable. She reached out. The heavy iron portcullis of Highreach Keep slammed shut, the metallic clang echoing through the freezing twilight. High above, nestled within the jagged peaks of the Ethelgard Mountains, the fortress was less a castle and more a prison for the man who ruled from within. King Garrick Vane was a monarch feared not for his cruelty, but for his very existence. He was the cursed Alpha, the last of a dying werewolf bloodline tainted by an ancient rotting magic. Garrick's curse was a grotesque anomaly even among his kind. When the moon pulled the beast from his bones, he did not just shift into a massive, terrifying predator. His very flesh radiated a dark, necrotic heat. Any living soul that dared to touch his skinned human or werewolf alike suffered agonizing, flesh-searing burns. It was an isolation so absolute, so profound, that it had slowly chipped away at the king's sanity over the past decade. He took no wife, claimed no mate, and suffered no servants in his private quarters. Food was pushed through a slotted iron door. His chambers, deep in the bedrock of the keep, were known simply as the Den. It was a place where men went to die, usually by volunteering as tributes in a desperate bid to win royal favor, only to be reduced to screaming, blistered corpses. In the lower town of Oakhaven, a harsh settlement clinging to the roots of the mountain, the reality of the king's suffering was just another terrifying folk tale used to frighten children. But for Rosalind Mercer, the curse was a brutal, tangible reality. Rosalind was the daughter of the late Maester Finian, a brilliant but disgraced apothecary who had spent his final years obsessively trying to synthesize a cure for the Arthur King. Finian had failed, and in the brutal politics of the High Court, failure was treason. Lord Cedric, the king's ambitious and deeply corrupt hand, had ordered Finian's execution under the guise of royal decree. With her father dead, Rosalind was left with a crushing debt to the crown, an empty apothecary shop, and a mind overflowing with her father's forbidden medical research. She knew the truth that the lords of the court ignored. Garrick's condition wasn't a divine punishment or demonic possession. It was a severe hyperreactive toxicity in his blood, triggered by his lycanthropy and the kingdom's native wolfsbane creeping into the mountain's water supply. On a bitterly cold Tuesday, Lord Cedric's guards kicked in a splintering wooden door of Rosalind's shop. They didn't come to collect coins, they came to collect her. "The crown demands its due, girl," snarled Captain Alaric, a hulking brute with a scarred jaw, as he roughly bound her wrists with thick hemp rope. "My father paid with his life," Rosalind shot back, her dark eyes flashing with defiance. She didn't weep. The harsh winters of Oakhaven had frozen the tears out of her long ago. "Your father's life paid for his own incompetence," Alaric grunted, dragging her out into the freezing mud of the street. "Your life will serve a higher purpose. The king is restless. The blood moon approaches, and the beast requires a calming presence, or failing that, a distraction." It was a death sentence thinly veiled as servitude. Lord Cedric was systematically sending anyone who opposed him into the den, knowing the cursed king would inadvertently kill them, thereby keeping the king isolated and the political power firmly in Cedric's heavily jeweled hands. The journey up the mountain was a grueling march through biting winds and blinding sleet. Rosalind's mind raced. She was not a warrior, nor was she nobility. She was a woman of science, of herbs, of calculated risks. Hidden deep within the lining of her wool cloak were 3 small vials of a pale blue tincture, a highly volatile extract of the frost lily root. a rare plant that thrived only in the permafrost of the highest peaks. Her father had hypothesized that its extreme endothermic properties could neutralize the necrotic heat of the king's blood, but he had never gotten the chance to test it. Rosalind, however, had been microdosing herself with the toxic root for months to build an immunity to the mountain's freezing temperatures, a desperate survival tactic after they were cut off from firewood. As they hauled her through the towering obsidian doors of Highreach Keep, Rosalind committed herself to one singular truth. She would not die cowering in the dark. She was led down winding, torchlit corridors, the air growing thick with the scent of damp stone, iron, and a heavy, musky odor of pine and predatory sweat. The guards stopped 20 paces from a massive, reinforced oak door banded with black iron. "In you go, apothecary," Alaric sneered, unlocking the heavy dead bolts. "Try not to scream too loudly. It upsets the hounds." With a brutal shove, Rosalind was thrust into the darkness, and the heavy door slammed shut behind her, the lock clicking into place with a sound like a breaking bone. The silence of the den was absolute, broken only by the ragged, wet sound of heavy breathing. Rosalind stood still, letting her eyes adjust to the glue. The chamber was cavernous, lit only by the pale, ethereal light of the moon filtering through high, iron-barred gratings. The floor was covered in crushed rushes and deep, clawed gouges that told stories of unimaginable agony. The air was stiflingly hot, smelling of ozone, dried blood, and burning hair. "I told Cedric, no more." The voice was a low, guttural rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone floor and into Rosalind's marrow. It was less a human voice and more the growl of a cornered predator forced to speak an alien tongue. From the shadows across the massive chamber, a figure detached itself. King Garrick Vane stepped into the moonlight. He was a terrifying sight. Stripped to the waist, his broad, violently muscular torso was mapped with raised, angry red scars. His skin seemed to shimmer with a faint, sickening heat haze. His eyes were not human. They were a piercing, luminous gold, the pupils blown wide in the dim light. Black veins crawled up his neck, pulsing with toxic energy. He was halfway between man and beast, his jaw elongated, his hands ending in thick, lethal talons that twitched with every labored breath. But Rosalind's trained apothecary eyes immediately saw past the monster to the man in pain. Wedged deep into the thick musculature of his left shoulder was the splintered shaft of a crossbow bolt. The surrounding flesh was blackened and necrotizing. Someone had tried to assassinate him, and the weapon was laced with silver. "Leave," Garrick commanded, his golden eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. "If you stay in this room, the heat will suffocate you. If you touch me, your flesh will melt from your bones. Beg your gods for mercy and die against the door." He expected her to weep. He expected her to hammer her fists against the iron wood and scream for guards that would never come. Every woman, every assassin, every tribute sent into this room had done exactly that before the curse took them. Instead, Rosalind dropped her heavy wool cloak to the floor. "You're dying," she stated flatly, her voice remarkably steady in the echoing chamber. Garrick paused, a low growl ripping from his throat. He took a predatory step forward, the sheer oppressive heat of his body washing over her like an open oven door. "I cannot die, little bird. That is the true curse. The silver in that bolt is poisoning your blood, interacting with the toxic magic in your system," Rosalind continued, walking slowly toward him. She kept her hands visible, her posture non-threatening but completely devoid of fear. "If it hits your heart, it might not kill you, but it will trap you in a state of perpetual cardiac rupture. An eternity of dying. Sit down." "I need to remove it." Garrick stared at her, utterly bewildered by her audacity. The beast within him surged, roaring at the insolence, but the fragmented man clinging to sanity was captivated. "Are you deaf or simply mad?" he snarled, closing the distance between them in a blink. He towered over her, the lethal heat radiating from his chest, causing the very air between them to warp. "To touch me is to burn. I am Rosalind Mercer, daughter of Maester Finian," she said, looking straight up into his terrifying golden eyes. She didn't flinch as the blistering heat hit her face. "And I do not burn." Before the king could react, before he could pull away to spare her the agony he inflicted on all things, Rosalind reached out. She pressed both of her bare, slender hands firmly against his searing, scarred chest to steady him. Garrick braced himself for her agonizing scream. He squeezed his eyes shut, hating himself, hating Cedric, hating the gods for forcing him to destroy another innocent life. He waited for the smell of roasting meat, but there was only silence. Slowly, Garrick opened his eyes. Rosalind was still standing there. Her hands were pressed flat against his pectoral muscles. Her skin was not blistering, it was not blackening. She was looking at him with intense, clinical concentration. A violent shudder racked the king's massive frame. For the first time in 10 agonizing years, he was feeling the touch of another living human being. It wasn't the searing pain of his magic violently rejecting life. It was a cool, soothing pressure. A profound, icy calm rushed from her fingertips, sinking deep into his overheated blood. "How?" Garrick breathed, the golden glow in his eyes flickering, giving way to a stormy human gray. The prominent fangs in his mouth began to retract. The beast, utterly shocked by the lack of pain, was receding. "Frostblily," Rosalind murmured, her fingers deftly probing the area around the silver bolt. "I've ingested enough of it over the last year to drop a plow horse. My blood runs colder than the mountain winds. Your heat cannot overcome my chill. Now hold still. This is going to hurt." Without waiting for his permission, Rosalind gripped the bloody, splintered shaft of the crossbow bolt. She planted her boot against his thigh for leverage again. No burns, no screaming, and yanked with all her might. Garrick let out a deafening, earth-shaking roar as the silver was torn from his flesh. He instinctively grabbed her arms with his massive, clawed hands, a reaction that would have snapped a normal person's forearms and charred them to ash. Rosalind gasped at the sheer strength of his grip, but her skin remained unblemished. She held the bloody bolt up in the moonlight. "Lord Cedric's fletching," she noted, examining the black and gold feathers. "He's tired of waiting for the curse to finish you. He's taking matters into his own hands." Garrick stared at where his hands gripped her arms. He slowly released her, staring at his own palms in absolute disbelief. He fell to his knees in the center of the den, the great and terrible Alpha King brought low, not by violence, but by simple, painless touch. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion he hadn't felt in a decade. "You aren't afraid of me." Rosalind knelt beside him, pulling a clean linen bandage and a vial of blue tincture from her bodice. She poured the icy liquid over his wound, watching as the black veins instantly began to recede into healthy, pink tissue. "Fear is for people who don't understand how things work, Your Majesty," Rosalind said softly, wrapping the linen securely around his broad shoulder. "And I intend to understand everything about you." In the cold, blood-stained darkness of the den, King Garrick looked at the apothecary's daughter, realizing that for the first time in his cursed life, he was not alone. And the Lord who sought to destroy him had just handed him his salvation. The days that followed the removal of the silver bolt blurred into a strange, clandestine domesticity within the stone walls of the den. For Garrick, the heavy odor that had been his eternal punishment was suddenly keeping the treacherous world out, protecting the one fragile, impossible thing that had given him hope. Rosalind did not cower in the corners. She immediately commandeered a sturdy wooden table meant for the king's meager meals, transforming it into a makeshift apothecary station. Using the supplies she had smuggled in her thick skirts and cloak mortar, pestle, dried herbs, and the precious vials of frost lily, she began her work. Garrick watched her, mesmerized, the beast within him, usually thrashing violently just beneath his scarred skin, was sedated by her presence. Her scent, a mixture of dried lavender, sharp winter air, and unyielding courage, became the anchor to his fractured humanity. With rigorous precision, Rosalind continued to administer the pale blue tincture to Garrick. The results were miraculous. The necrotic, blistering heat that had isolated him for a decade began to stabilize. It did not vanish entirely. His skin still ran unnaturally hot, like stones pulled from a hearth, but it no longer burned her. One evening, as the weak winter light faded from the iron grates high above, Rosalind sat beside him on the edge of his massive fur-lined bed. She was meticulously rubbing a salve of crushed comfrey and beeswax into the healing scar on his shoulder. "You are reckless, Rosalind Mercer," Garrick murmured, his deep voice vibrating in his chest. He turned his head, his face inches from hers. The golden hue in his eyes had softened into a warm amber glow. "You have bound your fate to a dead man. When Lord Cedric realizes I am not just alive but healing, he will not bother with poisoned arrows. He will send an army to breach this door." Rosalind's fingers paused on his skin. She met his gaze, her heart executing a sudden, erratic flutter that had nothing to do with fear. "Let him send an army. Cedric is an arrogant politician, but he is a fool when it comes to science and magic. He thinks your curse is a sickness that will inevitably consume you. He doesn't realize it is a reservoir of power." "Power?" Garrick scoffed bitterly, looking down at his large hands. "This curse made me a monster, Rosalind. It made me a prisoner in my own kingdom." "It made you a battery," she corrected him firmly, shifting closer. "The wolfsbane in the water supply reacted with your lycanthropy, creating an endless cycle of toxic combustion. The heat you emit is uncontrolled energy, but with a frost lily stabilizing your blood, you no longer have to bleed that energy out as a defense mechanism. You can control it, you can direct it." To prove her point, she reached down and took his massive hand in her smaller ones. She intertwined her fingers with his. Garrick's breath hitched. The sheer novelty of holding a woman's hand, of feeling the soft, cool texture of her skin without watching it blister and peel, sent a profound ache of longing through his chest. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the sensory input. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, leaning her head gently against his broad, muscular arm. "I feel peace," he confessed, a tremor of vulnerability in his voice. I had forgotten what it felt like to not be in agony. Outside the heavy iron doors, however, the peace was shattering. In the high tower of Highreach Keep, Lord Cedric paced furiously across the intricate carpets of the council room. General Montgomery Hayes, a ruthless mercenary commander hired by Cedric from the western borderlands, leaned against the map table, casually picking his teeth with a silver dagger. "It has been 3 weeks, Cedric," Hayes rumbled, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smirk. "The apothecary girl should be ash by now. The king should be dead from the silver bolt." Yet the guards stationed outside the den report no screams. No thrashing, only quiet. Cedric slammed his fist onto the heavy mahogany table. "It's impossible. The Maester's research died with him. That girl couldn't possibly have cured the cursed Alpha. She's a peasant. Peasant or not, she's keeping him alive," Hayes pointed out coldly. "And tomorrow night is the blood moon. If the beast fully turns while he still draws breath, he will break those iron doors down himself. You promised me a kingdom, Cedric. I will not lose it to a rabid dog and his pet witch." Cedric's eyes narrowed, a desperate, malevolent plan forming in his mind. "We do not wait for the curse to take him. Gather your men, Montgomery. Equip them with silver-forged blades and heavy iron chains. Tomorrow night, under the guise of an emergency royal decree, we breach the den. We will slaughter the girl in front of him to break his mind, and we will chain the Alpha King. If he cannot be killed, he will be weaponized. We will use his heat to forge a new empire." The trap was set, but Cedric and Hayes vastly underestimated the bond that had been forged in the dark. The blood moon rose over the Athilgard Mountains, casting a heavy crimson glow through the high barred windows of the den. The air inside the chamber crackled with an intense, raw electricity. Tonight was the night of the shift. For the past 10 years, this night had been a solitary descent into madness and agonizing pain for Garrick. But tonight Rosalind stood in the center of the room, fully prepared. She had brewed the final, most potent batch of the frost lily extract, pouring it into a silver chalice. Garrick stood before her, breathing heavily as the lunar pull began to snap his bones and tear at his muscles. "Rosalind," he gasped, falling to one knee as the dark veins pulsed wildly across his neck. "If the elixir fails, you must hide behind the iron grates. Do not let me touch you. It will not fail," she said with fierce conviction, holding the chalice to his lips. "Drink, my king. Own the beast. Do not let it own you." He drank the icy liquid in one desperate gulp. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. A shock wave of pure thermal energy exploded from Garrick's body, knocking Rosalind backward. But instead of the sickening necrotic heat that usually accompanied his turn, this heat was clean. It was the blistering heat of a forge, the pure, radiant energy of a healthy alpha. Before her eyes, Garrick transformed. He did not become the mangled, half-mad creature of the past. He towered at nearly 8 feet tall, a magnificent, terrifying apex predator, covered in thick, midnight black fur. His eyes burned with an intelligent, blinding gold light. He was awe-inspiring. He let out a booming, earth-shattering howl that shook the very foundations of High Reach Keep. At that exact moment, the heavy, dead bolts on the oak doors began to shatter. Boom, boom, boom. A battering ram, wielded by heavily armored mercenaries, smashed against the reinforced wood. Rosalind scrambled to her feet, drawing a pair of heavy alchemical glass spheres from her satchel. The door splintered and gave way with a deafening crack. General Montgomery Hayes marched into the den, flanked by 24 elite soldiers wielding silver-tipped spears and heavy crossbows. Following safely behind them was Lord Cedric, a triumphant sneer on his face. "Secure the beast," Cedric commanded, pointing a trembling finger at the massive wall. "And gut the girl. Get behind me." Garrick's voice echoed in Rosalind's mind, a direct telepathic link forged by their bond and the magic of his alpha status. As the soldiers charged, Rosalind hurled her glass spheres into the front line. They shattered, releasing a blinding flash of magnesium and a thick, choking cloud of suffocating pepper smoke. The mercenaries screamed, dropping their weapons as they clawed at their burning eyes. Through the smoke, the Alpha King struck. Garrick moved with a speed that defied his massive size. He was a shadow of vengeance, tearing through the silver-clad soldiers like parchment. The frost lily extract coursing through his veins allowed him to channel his heat deliberately. When a soldier thrust a spear at his chest, Garrick grabbed the wooden shaft. In a split second, intense localized heat flared from his pores, instantly turning the weapon to ash. He didn't just fight. He systematically dismantled Cedric's forces with surgical, brutal precision, all while keeping himself firmly positioned between the blades and Rosalind. General Hayes, roaring in frustration, pulled a massive silver broadsword and charged Garrick's blind side. You cursed freak! Garrick spun, catching the heavy silver blade between his bare, clawed palms. The silver hissed against his flesh, but Garrick did not flinch. He looked down at the mercenary, his golden eyes flashing with supreme authority. With a sickening crunch, Garrick snapped thick steel blade in half. He backhanded Hayes with enough force to send the heavy man flying across the chamber, crashing into the stone wall where he lay motionless. The remaining soldiers, seeing their legendary warlord broken in seconds, dropped their weapons and fell to their knees in sheer terror. The smoke began to clear. Lord Cedric stood alone near the shattered doorway, his face completely drained of color. He looked from the slaughtered mercenaries to the massive, terrifying wolf, and then to the apothecary girl standing defiantly untouched beside him. Slowly, the massive wolf began to shrink, his bones realigning, the black fur receding into the skin. Within moments, King Garrick stood before his treacherous hand, a human once more. He was naked, covered in the blood of his enemies, and radiating a powerful, undeniable royal authority. Cedric. Garrick's voice was dangerously calm. Cedric fell to his knees, openly weeping. "My king, Garrick, please. It was for the realm. The curse." "The curse is broken," Garrick stated coldly, stepping forward. He didn't bother to strike the sniveling man. "Gods!" He bellowed into the corridor. Loyal men of the keep, who had been locked away by Cedric's mercenaries, poured into the doorway, stopping in awe at the sight of their king, healed and victorious. "Take Lord Cedric to the deep mines of Oakhaven," Garrick ordered, not looking away from the traitor. "Let him spend the rest of his miserable life digging in the cold dark. If he returns to the surface, hang him." As the guards dragged a screaming Cedric away, Garrick turned slowly back to Rosalind. The adrenaline of the battle was fading, replaced by a profound, overwhelming exhaustion. He stumbled, falling to one knee. Rosalind rushed to him, throwing her arms around his broad, bare shoulders. She held him tightly, pressing her face against his neck. He was warm, wonderfully warm, but he did not burn. Garrick wrapped his massive arms around her waist, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender and victory. "You saved me," he whispered against her skin, the terrifying Alpha King sounding completely humbled. "We saved each other," Rosalind corrected softly, pulling back just enough to look into his beautiful human eyes. She smiled, brushing a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "Now I believe you have a kingdom to run, Your Majesty." Garrick stood, pulling Rosalind up with him. He took her hand, lacing his fingers securely through hers. Together they walked out of the bloody den, stepping over the shattered remains of the heavy iron door, and ascended the stairs toward the dawn breaking of a high-reach keep. The cursed Alpha was no more. In his place stood a true king, and beside him the brilliant, fearless queen who had walked into the dark and brought him back into the light. Did Rosalind and Garrick's fiery romance leave you absolutely breathless? If you loved this dramatic tale of the cursed Alpha King and the fearless apothecary who healed his shattered heart, hit that like button right now. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and share this video with your fellow fantasy lovers to help us grow. Let us know in the comments what thrilling twists you want next.